Hello, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. And I'm very happy to have with me an established and beautiful artist who lives in our community. You know, one of the main missions of our show has always been to promote local artists. We have so many people who live in our community. Some of them are actually famous, but many of them just work away at their great art and are actually not well known. And so we try very, very hard. We have art shows here several times a year in our efforts to promote our great local artists. So I am really very pleased to have with me today one of our great local artists. He's going to show you a whole bunch of his own paintings, and then we're going to see some stuff about the masters in Rome. So I tell you, it is a delight to have. Please welcome Dr. Michael Sullo. Thank you for being here. You are a painter, a teacher, an artist. What else can I say about you that you want the world to know about you?
I'm flattered. I think that's more than enough.
So tell us a little bit about the stuff that you want to present for our audience today.
Yes, I'd like to talk basically about what it is to become an artist or becoming an artist.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that is required and so on. Most people believe that to become an artist, all you need to do is learn how to paint or sculpt or something. But it's a lot more than that. It's very, very cerebral. A lot of study goes into it. A lot of history goes into it. Just about everything that's in science and math and so on are all involved, especially in oil painting.
Mm-hmm. And what's the attraction of oil painting? I mean, I've had a number of artists. I've had pastels, I've watercolor.
Right.
I've had all kinds of artists come in and tell us about how that's what attracted them. But what's the greatness about oil? Of course, it's ancient in terms of you go back in centuries and that's what they use. But tell me a little more about what makes oil such a great medium for painting.
Okay, well, oil painting is not quite that ancient.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, before oil painting, it was egg tempera. And a lot of even the cave drawings are done in egg tempera. And of course, that's using eggs, raw eggs.
Wow, okay.
And you use it because, well, did you ever get egg on your clothes?
Yes.
It never comes out, right? It's the same thing. It's very, very strong, adhesive. And if you tint it and dye it, it stays for a long, long time, especially if you paint it on wood. Painting on canvas in Europe particularly came in the Cinquecento, in the 14th century,
Mm-hmm.
and mostly with Tiziano, who was in Venice, in Venetia. And he was considered really the first, well, one of the first people to become, who was very famous, to become an artist almost exclusively on canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and using oil, I'm sorry,
Right.
because it was about oil, and
Yes.
using oil paint. So Tiziano, I think, was the beginning, at least in Italy anyway, of oil painting on canvas that we have today.
Still today.
Now, yeah, and of course they use different oils. They use poppy oil and so on.
Well, the technique, has the techniques
Right.
changed?
Not much,
Okay.
no, not by much. The techniques are pretty much the same. So in that case, you're absolutely right. It is a very kind of, well, 500 years, 600 years.
Yes.
It's quite a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very famous right at the moment and used constantly.
Right, right. So we're going to take with you kind of like a little journey into what makes a great artist. And
Okay.
starting out, we have some videos. We've got some lovely photographs from the Sistine Chapel in Rome. So we want to kind of invite our audience to sort of take a magic tour of art in the world, actually. Or we're going to really concentrate on European art. But you, as an American artist, have some stuff that you want to show us in terms of maybe being in the tradition. I know, I don't know we want to spend much time on it, but you're, as an artist, what are your principal interests in terms of the kind of paintings that you like to do?
Well, I'm 67 years old, and so I've had a long, long career in oil painting, and So there was a time when I had many different genre that I would do. At this point in my life, I do mostly ecclesiastical paintings.
Okay.
Paintings for churches, those and portraits. And I teach a lot of different genre. I teach tonalism, French Impressionism, American Impressionism, things like that, where that's the beginning. When you start with that type of painting, for instance, tonalism has a limited palette. You only need paint to create green and to create gray.
Oh, okay.
And that's all you need. Oh. And so to make green, of course, you're going to use yellow and blue and yellow and black. And to make gray, use black and white. And then you add one more, some warm brown, sienna perhaps. And you add that in so that your entire painting isn't all cool. In other words, cool colors, because it could become boring if it was like that. And it's very quick, easy stroked painting. Actually, the history of that, very quickly, I don't want to go too deep into that, but the history of tonalism was when the country was new. Of course, the government would send out people, surveyors, to take surveys of the landscape, where the lakes are, where the hills are of the United States, right? Just, into like Niagara Falls and places like that. And photography was at its infancy, and it was useless out in the field because it was all glass plate, and you needed to be able to process it. So what they decided to do was to use artists, landscape artists. Now, landscape artists wasn't, okay, let's get this correct. Landscaping was not considered art until much later. Landscapes were mostly made behind portraits or behind scenes, like war scenes or something like that. In and of itself, it wasn't considered an art form. But these people, these artists, went with the surveyors into Indian country and places like that was outrageous for them to do.
Right.
And of course, most of them lived in cities. And so at the beginning, they would go out there and set up their easel. The surveyors would be off, and they'd be painting and taking their time and so on. And the surveyors would move along.
Right.
And they're here trying to paint, and the next thing you know, they're afraid. Where's the Indians? Where's the Nazpez Indians? Where's where are the Cherokee Indians? Where are they? And also bears and creatures that they have never confronted before.
Right.
So they came up with this technique with a limited palette and minimum strokes. They used mostly scumbling and so on, and worked small canvases. And after a while, tonalism became a very beautiful technique that these fellows perfected. And if you went down to Florence Grizzle Museum, you'll see quite a few tonalist paintings.
All right.
And they are pretty magnificent, even with the limited palette. But then the next step up from that is American Impressionism, which only added a very few additional colors. So the palette was expanded just maybe 2 or 3 colors. And of course, they were done in safer areas where the artist could change brushes and clean his brushes in between. It wasn't under that pressure.
Right.
But it's quite a history of that. But to become an artist, to create art, you need to understand that. You need to understand things. You need to give forth of your mind, of yourself. Technique is fine.
Okay.
And there's a lot of teachers that teach just basically technique, which is okay. That's good. And a lot of that's good for hobbyists and so on. But if you're really going to create art, you've got to remember that you're painting for people 100 years from now or 200 years from now. you have to give them something. Portrait artists, particularly, what are you trying to say about this person? Most portrait artists today worry too much about getting a likeness.
Right.
And likeness comes. Practice. You practice. You try it and so on. Learn to draw. Very, very important. Learn to draw. Learn the reflections. Learn how, for instance, you see an eye that has a light beam in it. You know, where is that reflection? And do they have to be identical in both eyes? Yes, they do. Otherwise, the eyes start to look crooked and so on. Oh, it's really, it's an art. I did this painting of my wife.
This is a portrait.
That's a portrait of my wife several years ago. And of course, we're much older than that now. But anyway,
Beautiful portrait.
well, thank you very much.
Beautiful woman.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. But in this, there's a lot of things that I felt about her and that she had in her own mind. Like, for instance, she loves Gothic interiors, and so I put her in a Gothic interior.
Yes.
She had a great love for A Starry Night, so I suggested it in the back, as you can see.
And the red flowers.
And the red flowers, she loves roses.
And the red and the stone, red stone in the necklace.
Ah, now that necklace, that necklace was in a catalog, a Harry Winston catalog.
Oh, okay. Very
Now,
expensive jewelry.
Very expensive jewelry. Even the movie stars rent it from them. They don't even buy it. But this was my love, and I never bought that for her, but it would be my wish that if I can give her anything, I would give her that very beautiful piece, which is, you know, impossible and not going to happen in my lifetime, but there it is nevertheless.
Yes. And I'd say that, you know, it's not only the woman's face and the upper torso, but the sense of light which comes in from these windows.
Thank you.
Also even I see even with her nostrils onto her into the top of her upper lip.
Oh.
I mean that's to me displays a certain kind of determination. That's what I see when I look at that.
Thank you.
And beautiful arched eyebrows. I mean, you can see, all kinds of features of a person that then give you a sense of who the person might actually be.
Thank you very much. There is an old story. Actually, it was taught to me years and years ago when I was very young, like 12 years old, and learning to paint portraits. And I was an apprentice. And the way it was set up was there was the master here on his easel, and on this side was the sitter, and then I was sitting back here. Well, not only me, but the other apprentice who would have that seat here. So he would paint, and we would follow. And he painted a picture of a woman who was older, and actually old as he, and he was probably in his late 70s at that time. And so we're painting. I'm sitting here. You don't say anything. You keep your mouth shut when the master is painting. So he's painting, and I'm following, and I'm watching, and he's painting her what I thought very young. She had crow's feet, of course. He painted them out, and her neck was a little bit oldish, angular, and so on. He painted all that out. She was in kind of a smock, and he painted her in a very beautiful, not too over the top gown. And I'm copying it. And so after she leaves, I said to him, why are we painting this as a young woman? And he said, I'll tell you why. You won't understand it, but I'm going to tell you why, and later in years you will. And he said, and everything at that time was the Bible. Bible this, Bible that, which was part of my growing up. And he said, when Christ was crucified, he was beaten and tortured, and his body was a wreck. And then he was hung on the, they called it the tree. He was hung on the tree, and then of course they took him down and put him in a tomb. The next day, or the day after, I'm sorry, the girls came to bury him, to anoint him in the Jewish fashion, and of course he wasn't there. And so Mary Magdalene, and this is right out of the Bible, Mary Magdalene was crying outside of the tomb, of course. And she sees a person there, and she thinks it's the gardener. And this person says to her, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Well, because they took our teacher, our rabbi, and I don't know where he is." Now, of course, this is Christ. And he calls her name. She recognized his name. His voice, his voice. Mm-hmm. She recognized her name, of course, and his voice. And she realized that it was Christ. She traveled with him for many months, maybe longer. So she knew what he looked like, what he sounded like, and so on. But he didn't look like that anymore. And the reason why, now again, this is my master, our teacher, telling me this story. She did not recognize him because he was in his resurrected body. All people have a resurrected body. And when you die, God sees you as the most beautiful. I almost get choked up. As the most beautiful person you ever were. As a portrait artist, you have to look through God's eyes and see that person as the most beautiful as they ever were in their life. And that's why you get paid to be a portrait artist. If you just want a likeness, take a photograph.
Right.
Become a good photographer. And that's good too. But to be a portrait artist, you need to look through God's eyes and paint the most beautiful person sitting there as you can. Interesting
story. Interesting. Let's continue because you're a man with fascinating stories to tell us. And so many questions I have.
Go ahead.
So we have actually a short video.
Okay.
That is a boy with a thorn.
Uh-huh.
And the videos that we have are from the Slater Museum in Norwich, which is part of the Norwich Free Academy.
Right.
We highly recommend both of us.
Oh, please. Absolutely.
Go there,
it's a sleeper
see
museum.
This. It's a wonderful museum. I had a couple of years back, Vivian Zoe, who is the museum director. I had her on my program. We talked about some of the art that they have.
Oh, yeah.
So go ahead, and we're going to show the first little video. It's a review of The Boy with the Thorns, and it's actually taken from something is in the Slater. You can go to the Slater and actually see this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
And the Slater, let me just say one more thing about the Slater. They're Vivian particularly, an incredibly generous museum. And you can go in the museum, bring your pad with you, your sketch pads and pencils, sit down in front of these magnificent sculptures and draw and copy them. And they are very welcoming, and it's really just a magnificent sleeper museum. You really need to go. Take some time. So this first video, if you want to... It is very important to be discerning when you visit a museum. Notice this young boy removing a thorn from his foot. Look at his hair. The hair falls down as though the statue were standing. Very unnatural. It should fall down in front of his face, as would be natural. Probably a mismatch. Part of being an artist is to learn to be discerning about what because if something is in a museum, doesn't necessarily make it a museum quality piece. That particular bit of sculpture was excavated probably around the 1400, about 1430. And back at that time, of course, they were buried years and years before that, first century perhaps, and put into holes, buried. with probably many statues or many pieces of statues that were destroyed for one reason or another. It could have been an earthquake, it could have been war, it could have been anything. And so when they're excavated, they're put back together like puzzles. That particular piece, you have to be discerning when you go to a museum and look at it and say, huh, that just doesn't look right. What doesn't look right about it? Well, as I said there, the hair, if a statue is standing up, of course the hair falls down, the person. The hair falls downward. He's leaning over. The hair should fall in front. More likely than not, there was a head somewhere buried in that pile.
But that's not the one that
But that's not the one that belongs on it. Right. And there were many, many copies of that, some in bronze, some in stone, and so on. And it was not unusual for that to happen. So that's really, aside from learning technique, then start to go to a museum and discern the paintings that you're looking at.
Next, we have another video that we want to show, which also then emphasizes another way to learn to be a great artist.
Technique, right.
And the importance of technique. So if we can, we'll show the second video, which is also from the Slater. And it'll talk about the whole technique, or one of the techniques one would use in terms of creating great art.
Okay, this is the Belvedere. This is a copy of the Belvedere torso. The original is in Rome in the Vatican Museum. In art history and in the use of this as a model in the late Renaissance was amazing. All of the major artists, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, used this as their model for their own pieces of art. Michelangelo has been said to use this statue as the models for the inuti that are on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. One of the ideas of who this was is Hercules, and that's the one, for me, as a historian, works best. And the reason for that is that he is sitting on a lion's.
Well, what would you like to add to that wonderful video?
Well, that was unearthed, again, around 1420, 1430. And as I said, all the major artists of the Renaissance used that because at the time, used the proportionality, the structure, the muscle structure, and so on, because at that time, it was not legal. Legal in both because of the Pezzanavante, the church, and so on, who was very, very strong at that time, and also regular legal laws. Was not proper to cut into a human body. Absolutely not allowed. And so the artists, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and so on, they would do other things. Now there are rumors that Da Vinci went down into the monasteries and did cut into the dead bodies, the corpses, and so on. But there's so many stories that are
not true,
not necessarily true,
right,
not
right.
necessarily true. Right. But that's why the Belvedere torso was such a magnificent find, and it influenced the art incredibly. And we'll see that in a second when we go into the Sistine Chapel.
So we have a series of photographs that are going to talk about the Sistine Chapel. many years ago, I happened to visit Rome and went into the Vatican and saw that as a tourist. But you have actually a far more intimate pictures to show us of, in fact, why don't you give us a little introduction? Put on the photos from the Sistine Chapel. Tell us a little bit about it's maybe some of the stories that are not true that have been carried forward.
Right. Now, this really, as we continue on with becoming an artist, really this part is having confidence in what you can do and knowing what you cannot do also. And one of the major stories of the Sistine Chapel was that Michelangelo did not want the project. That's nonsense. He worked hard to get that project. He fought hard. That Sistine Chapel ceiling at that time was more than $3.5 million in our money today. And he wanted it badly.
That was a high commission, yes.
High commission. And he, of course, knew Pope Julius personally because he had already cut stone for him. And he did get the job, of course. That job should have went to Ghirlandaio. Ghirlandaio at the time was the finest fresco artist in all of Italy and probably all the world at that point. But of course, politics is politics.
Politics is politics.
No matter what it is.
Yes.
And so Michelangelo did get it. And Michelangelo did, the story goes, apprentice for Ghirlandaio for a very short time when he was in his teens, but never took on any projects like that. And of course, fresco was painting on wet plaster and so on. But he did want the project, and he got it. And to complete the project, he went to Ghirlandaio's studio and he raided it. He took his best. Apprentice and hired them away from Ghirlandaio. And even at that, there's one quick story before we get into the pictures. When they started this project, of course, they had to have scaffolding. It's 60 feet in the air. It's very high. It's 6 stories high.
Right.
And of course, the carpenters had to come in back then. It wasn't like the scaffolding we have now, and build it. And they built the scaffolding. And so they went up there. Now, what I was saying before is you got to know what you can and can't do. And so they go up, the crew go up, and the Sistine Chapel really consists of 9 panels that run down the center. And they are Genesis. And if you walk from where the priest says Mass down, you go up in Genesis. It follows. Now, they started at the other end.
Right.
And so the first thing that they attempted to paint, the first large painting, was the Ark. And they did it more or less like an easel painting rather than a fresco. And they were, very self-confident and happy and so on. And they came down because, of course, the carpenters had to rip down the scaffold and move it to the next position. And when they took the scaffold down and they looked up, they went, oh my God, what did we do? The painting was too detailed. The figures were too small. And you could hardly see them from 60 feet away.
Oh.
And it was a disaster. And actually, Michelangelo did promise Pope Julius that he would take it out and do it again. And of course, he never did. He was famous for not finishing projects.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, God, yes. He was like notorious for not finishing projects. But anyway, let's go through some of this.
Can we see some of the photographs that we, there we go.
Okay, now that's the Cappella Magna. That's the Sistine Chapel. And if you take a look at it, you can see it looks like a fort.
Yes, it does.
And basically, it was built like that because, of course, that was before the unification of Italy, and even when Rome was in turmoil and so on. And so the Pope and his people, the cardinals and so on, will go in there, lock themselves in, and there was no way, it's like being in a big cocoon. There was no way that they could be attacked or captured or whatever that happened to be. And then after those times, the Gothic times, it became a hulk. And of course, Pope Sixtus, resurrected it as a chapel as a private chapel for the Pope and the cardinals and so on. And they painted a belt that goes all the way around of paintings, frescoes, and one of them was done by Ghirlandaio. And they're absolutely magnificent paintings. But the ceiling was covered with a fresco of stars.
Right, you said that to me earlier.
Right, and so what they had to do was to chip all of that out.
Boy, that's a big job.
It's a big job, is
yes,
right.
Yes.
And so they had to chip it out, and they had to take, of course, 60 feet in the air and take the pieces of plaster and put it in buckets and lower it down.
Oh my goodness.
It was a monster job.
Yes.
Like the pictures of Charlton Heston laying on his back, painting, is all nonsense, absolute nonsense. This is a massive, big undertaking.
Right.
Can we get to the next picture of the ceiling?
Here we are.
There it is. And if you look down the center, there are 9 large paintings that are really the essence. On one side of those paintings, you'll see the polytheist people who are very gods and so on, and on the other side some are relatives of Christ and that. So you have both the old and the new coming together in that. So can we move on to the creation of Adam?
There we go.
There it is.
That's probably one of the most famous that non-visitors can identify.
Oh, yeah. Now, that's the creation of Adam, and if you look at the project, at that overall, there are many things that Michelangelo put in his ideas, because he did do the sketches for the panels. The panels were probably okayed or allowed by the College of Cardinals or some kind of committee.
Some kind of approval mechanism.
Some kind of an approval, right. Some kind of an approval mechanism. So if we can go to the next picture there, that shows just Adam alone. Look at his torso. Didn't we just see that at the Slater Museum?
Yes.
There it is. Okay, now also realize that he's not quite alive. Okay, his body is there, and he's reaching out, just alive enough to pull himself up onto one elbow, reach out for God the Father to receive the spark of life. Can you go on to the next panel, please? There's his picture. There's the drawing of the Belvedere torso that Michelangelo used for the body of Adam. If you can move on from there, please.
The fingers.
They're not, you see?
Not touching.
They're not touching, so Adam is not quite alive yet. Very close, and he's just about ready to come to life, but not yet. And that's very, very important in the overall of the presentation of the Sistine Chapel. Well, we can do 4 or 5 hours just on this one panel alone.
Right.
Please go on to the next panel. Okay, now, there is God the Father, and you can see him reaching out. Look at his cape. What does it look like? It looks like a brain, doesn't it?
Oh, okay.
So some have interpreted that as the mind of God.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And if you look, there are other people And those are angels before angels had halos and wings.
Right. The wingless angels.
No, your wingless angels. That's the way they were represented at that time in the 14th century. Now, look underneath the Father's arm. What is that?
He's putting his arm around someone, yes?
And it's a woman. Okay, so what is Michelangelo saying? That God has always, from the beginning, had woman and man in his mind.
Right.
He just created man, and soon he will
Creates
create Eve. If you move on, please. Okay. Okay, now this is interesting. This drawing is one of Michelangelo's drawings, of course. And if you look at it, this is going to be a woman. It's going to be a Sibyl. And if you look at the drawing, you realize that Michelangelo really has painted a man, drawn a man, so that all the muscles and so on, the ribs and so on, are really kind of that of a man. And the overemphasized all the muscles and things. Woman wouldn't necessarily look like that. However, it's anatomically correct. So by this drawings like these, little whispers started going out that he must be dissecting corpses and so on to have that much knowledge.
Knowledge of what the body actually is.
Right.
Interesting.
Please move on to the next. Now this is the painting. Now, this is of course on the Sistine Chapel, and it's a fresco, and that is the Lydian Sibyl, and as you can see, she has an open book. And what this painting is the only one that they can actually say that Michelangelo painted this, or at least was a major part of this. Most of the paintings he did not do. He did the sketches and he oversaw the project. But this particular one, they can say that he
Was actually
almost
responsible.
certainly painted this with his own hand. Now, that is very significant because she's looking down at the altar and she's closing the book, and that's the book of life. As in polytheism, you have to have your name, of course, in the book of life. So she's closing the old ideas. She's closing the old beliefs in favor of Jesus and Christianity, who is down on the altar at this point.
I see. Okay.
There are so many things, and these are not secrets like you see, well, the secrets of this and the secrets of that. Those are not secrets. Those are intentionally put in. And what we were talking about was adding your personality in, adding your knowledge into your work.
Right.
Now, you don't have to be Michelangelo to create art. But you do have to include your thoughts, your ideas, your background, things that you love, things that you don't like, into your paintings. That's what makes you an artist. Not that the fact that you can paint.
Right.
Or you can create something that looks like, a very beautiful pastoral scene or something. What else are you giving? What else are you telling us about? Anyway.
The other thing that you wanted to talk to us about was the well, I guess it's not quite technique, but you wanted to introduce the idea of Pieta, which is also from some work that you did at the Slater Museum.
Yes.
So we actually have a video, another video from the Slater, where we're going to talk about the Pieta. Give us just a quick background on what it actually is. What is the Pieta for people who may not be so knowledgeable?
Well, and Michelangelo was learning to become an artist, although he was gifted, way gifted. A lot of that was a priori. He was born with that ability. But he had studied and apprenticed to two other people in different techniques. But then he was brought into the Medici garden, which was a place for sculptors. And he was only in his early 20s when this was carved. And if you look at the statue, it's very important to realize that this is not a pietà. Pietà in Italian means pity. And most pictures of Mary and Christ, or carvings, indeed, carvings, were a woman who's beside herself because her son is dead.
Right.
And so, and he's down from the cross at this point, and she's beholding her dead son. And so you feel pity for her, you feel pity for him, and so on. And that's pietà. However, this statue, this particular carving is not, in my opinion now, is not a pity statue. It's a statue of offering. And it's Michelangelo's idea that he carved this statue not to get sorrow from us, but to get good thoughts.
Some kind of joyous thing?
Joyous thing.
So that she's making the sacrifice of her
She
son
is,
for the greatness of the world, it says.
Exactly. She's offering.
Just like the great priests always do, they make offerings to God.
Exactly. So if you look at her, and you'll see it in this presentation, Mary is holding out the body of her son, and her face is demure, and his face is very at rest.
Serene.
So she's holding out the body and blood of her son to anyone who believes.
Okay. Can we show the video of this little discussion, also taken from the Slater? So if you want to go and learn sculpture and techniques and stuff, go and visit the Slater and take a look. It can be your garden of paradise in terms of your learning.
That's right.
So let's see what we got here.
This very famous statue is the Pietà, carved by Michelangelo, and his 24th year of life. Absolutely magnificent piece. It's my opinion that pietà means pity. It's my opinion that this is not a pity statue. If you look at the face of Mary, she's very demure, not as though she's holding a dead man. And if you look at the face of Christ, you'll see once again, he's very dreamlike, and even pose is not that of rigor mortis or death. I'd like to submit that this is more a statue of offering. This is more an offering statue because if you look at the positions of Mary's hands, here's one here on her son. Also notice too that her hand does not touch the sacred body of her son Christ. There is part of the winding sheets. The sheet that they used to take him down from the cross is still here. It's included in the statue. And her other hand, on this side, as you can see, is an offering. She's making an offering, so she's holding out the body and blood of her dead son to all those who believe. anything else like that?
So that's a lovely, lovely piece. And it's a great opportunity for students to get themselves to the Slater as an opportunity to learn and to sketch and to get some flavor.
Yeah.
Right here, you don't have to go to Rome.
No.
All you have to do is walk to Norwich.
That's right.
And you can get a real sense of what out there in the art world might be.
And there I am, right there, and I'm touching it, and I'm looking around the backside and so on. You go to Rome, you can't get anywhere near it.
That's right.
You touch it in Rome, they'll shoot you dead right on the spot.
Right.
So
not allowed. So is a good exercise for artists to do.
It's,
So you, also as a teacher and as a painter, you have a studio in Velvet Mill, which is in Stonington.
right.
And you've also brought with us a few examples of your own artwork. And you do give art classes at the Velvet Mill?
I do. I give live classes, both.
There you are. There's some information. You can go right to the website or just email directly or make a phone call and find out about art classes that are available.
Right. Thank you very much.
No, it's wonderful. So now we've looked at this wonderful portrait of your wife.
Okay.
And so now we get into much more of the religious stuff. Yes, absolutely. Right behind me.
Now that is, again, I'll probably get lots of calls about this and maybe controversy, but there are no descriptions of Christ. No one knows what he looks like, or at least there's no history of what he looked like. And so I took some time and said, okay, let me see what I can research.
Okay.
To come up with a face that at least resembles Christ. Now, there's a lot of information out there. There's, of course, the what's the name of it? What he was, the Shroud of Turin.
Oh, yes.
Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, what he was wearing.
But if you see it, actually see the Shroud of Turin, or see even pictures that were taken of it, radiography and so on, it's just a blurry mess. There's no way. And people have tried with computers and so on. But really, is it true? I'm not saying whether the shroud was really his or not. What I'm saying, can you get a true face from the Shroud of Turin?
The answer is no.
I don't know. In my opinion, I think not.
Okay.
And then also when Christ was being crucified, his face was wiped with blood and so on, was wiped off by Veronica. And there's a thing called the Veronica, which is supposed to have been the cloth that Veronica wiped Christ's face and his image was left on it. Well, I researched that, and again, it's just kind of a bloody blur. It didn't work at all for me. So I said, well, let me see if I can research the people. Now, when you research, you have to research backwards, of course. And you can't go with Joseph, because Joseph was not Christ's father. Okay. Mary is Christ's mother.
All right.
So what you have to do, if you want to find the descendants of Christ, you got to work from Mary's family.
All right.
And work forward.
Okay.
And so I have friends that are rabbis, and I went to them and I said, who are the descendants of Mary from that village and so on coming forward? And one of them had no idea, and the other one said, well, we can, this is kind of interesting for us too, let's research it. And it took quite a while, and they came back with the answer that the Hasidic Jews would be the line of Mary, these two. Now that's why I get a lot of, every time I talk about this presentation, I get a lot of letters, that's not true, this and that. But that's the information that I got.
Okay.
And so what I did with that was I found as many pictures of young men in their 30s, or at the beginning of their 30s, who are Hasidic. And it was difficult because, of course, they have the curls and the hat and all that. But just to get them without that, and to see if I could find, like, for instance, if it's an Oriental person, you know, they have the eyes and so on, or a Polynesian, they all have a particular look. So I was looking for something that I can tie this together. And I researched like crazy. And all I could find was that they had a jaw structure that when they grew beard, it separated like that. It separated into two pieces. Also, the only other thing that I can find was that they have blue-gray eyes, the Hasidics, some. And then I said, okay, let me try one more thing. And of course, there are many movies made, like The Greatest Story Ever Told, and so on, these big cinema projects, and they have massive budgets. And of course, they do the same thing.
Yes.
And on a bigger, much bigger scale than I can do.
Right, of course.
But again, and that research, a lot of that's available. And if you look, and follow their research, they almost came up with the same answer. Because if you see Max von Sydow or Jeffrey Hunter, so on, they have blue-gray eyes in the part. So that's the best that I can come up with. And so I worked it. And it took me a while. It took me about 6 months to come up with something that I thought could be as close to what Christ would have looked like.
Right.
So
you gave him is that like a halo? Is that the idea?
That's just a painting trick.
Oh, okay.
That's a painting technique.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's kind of a halo, you could say that.
Yeah.
But it's really, in the end, it's a portrait style where you take the face off the canvas. And I didn't want to get too schmaltzy. I didn't want it to be too religious because I'm looking for a man. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that Christ was not the Son of God. What I'm saying is, for my picture of a man, okay, I didn't want to go too far into halos and those symbols that would have made him God. Just what if, if I was walking down the street in Jerusalem and Christ was there at the same time, what did he look like? What would he look like? Could I recognize him? And that's the best.
So is there any symbolism to the fact that he's wearing red on this cloth? Is that blood? Is that the symbol of blood?
Well, you can a little bit of that. I didn't want to be too unreligious.
Yeah, all right, okay. So that's not an accident. That was by design.
I put that in, and as you can see, the cassock that he's wearing instead of his shirt, and so on. And he also has part of armor. If you look on the other side,
from the
over there,
Roman
and that's because in Revelations, God will return as a warrior, and so I try to piece things together to make this the best representation that me, Dr. Michael Sullo, living in the 21st century, could come up with, and that's the best that I can do.
So it also is this, because it's very, very dark around the edges. I'm sure, obviously, is there something that gives some sense of why that is? Is it holiness? Is it, what's the sense of the darkness?
The sense of the darkness is just to isolate it, to emphasize the face, so that there aren't trees or so on, landscapes or so on going on. That's just...
So my eye should center right there in the face, right?
At the eyes. If you look at them, I work a very difficult time on the eyes to let them look straight out. And actually, if that's hanging in the room, as you walk through the room,
you think the eyes are going to
follow you. The eyes follow you.
All right.
And again, that's another portrait. I don't say trick. It's a
technique. A technique,
yeah,
of course.
And how you do that, of course, is make the eyes look straight out so that they follow you around the room. And again, that's my best interpretation.
So we're going to sort of wrap up our discussion. There is another picture behind you, so people could. But if you want, you can come to your studio, correct?
Oh, yes.
And see these paintings.
Yes, yes.
And even the portrait of your wife.
No, actually, that hangs in my home.
No, that hangs in the house. All right, so the artist keeps things. So you can come to your studio at the Velvet Mill.
Right.
And I strongly recommend, just like people should go to the Slater Museum in Norwich, people should go to the Velvet Mill in Stonington. It's got a lot of, you're there, but there are lots and lots of other artists there. There's a brewery, there's a restaurant. It's just like a fun place to go.
It is.
And so definitely I recommend that people give a visit.
Nice.
And I also want to give out some shout outs because we here in the studio, coming in December 14th, we are going to have an art show. Oh. And I want people to come. And the theme this year is going to be pets. So we're actually looking far and wide, but not too far because we want to promote local artists. If you are an artist, a photographer, whatever the medium it is, if you have pets, dogs, cats, snakes, whatever, birds, as your subject matter, we're interested in having you participate in our art show. So I want people to contact me, contact the studio. Again, December 14th. The whole place is open for people to come on and take a look. We'll always have food. I work with 2 Italian guys. We always have food, and we have vino, and we're going to have a wonderful time. Sometimes we have entertainment, but we're going to have lots and lots of little gifts, not necessarily $1,000 pictures out there. We'll have lots of other little things that can be wonderful for you to give as a present. I highly recommend it. Instead of giving toys to your children, like my grandchildren, instead of giving them toys which they don't need, even books which they might get rid of, I try and get them paintings. I buy them paintings, I buy them photographs, I buy them prints, so that they can take with them for the rest of their lives. So think about that. The cost of an expensive toy is $50, $75, $100. Don't do that. Give them a boys, girls, young, old. Go ahead and get them a nice piece of art which they can keep for forever. So that's our great art show. And also then Harriet Grayson, if you actually want to learn about grants writing, we're always writing grants for this poor studio. We are a nonprofit. So if you want to know about grants writing, I'm going to be doing a class right here at the studio on December 11th, a few days before the art show. Contact me at my 5starseminars.net for information. You can register, whatever. So that's our great events happening in December. You'll see much more of us, and also to give a shout out to our Franks for helping me to edit my documentary that's now available on YouTube. Go and see Aftermath, a wonderful documentary about the destruction and rebuilding of Misquamica Beach after Superstorm Sandy. And we are going to be working on a new one, like what did we learn 5 years after the fact. So this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Showcase. Please join us again, and thank you, and thank my guest, Michael.
Thank you very much. Molto gentile.